It feels like the onslaught of information we've been the recipients of for 10 years or more has kind of created a sort of irrational dogmatism. Not a sort of epistemological relativism, but almost something like that, where we just feel very skeptical about everything. In other words, when I grew up, it was in the 80s and 90s, and I had, maybe there was the town atheist, and then there was the Baptist pastor, and these were the people I would have duke it out, and then I would decide among them, and then I'd feel confident in my position. Yeah. But now we're in this strange place where no matter how good you are at convincing or making your case, there's likely to be someone else who's attacking it, and you can't possibly respond to everything. So it feels like I think a lot of people just, again, it's like this, almost like there's this concern of mine that because of the onslaught of information, many of us are skeptical that we can make successful cognitive contact with reality.
That's a brilliant way to put it. Yeah, I think this is a problem within Christianity. This is a problem in politics. This is a problem for any kind of belief about reality. Are you familiar with the idea of paradox of choice?
Let's talk about it. I'm not.
Okay. Barry Schwartz, I believe, is the guy who wrote the book. His argument is this. So I'm going to start with this and meander my way back to answering your question.
Take your time.
He gives the example of buying jeans. That he bought some jeans years ago, and there were 3 different kinds, and he knew which kind he liked. Eventually, those jeans wore out. He had to go buy some new jeans, but it's been many years because, jeans are durable. Suddenly, there's 40 types of jeans, and so he spends an hour trying on different jeans, and he says he leaves there with the most comfortable jeans he's ever worn, and he was unhappy because he realized if he'd stayed another hour, he could have found an even better pair of jeans. And he uses this to say, we live in an age where we have so many different options that it can feel overwhelming. I hate the Cheesecake Factory. I hate everything about it almost. And one of the things that's terrible about it is the menu is way too long. And so you just get overwhelmed. You can spend 15 minutes and have no further idea what it is that you want. But this is affecting so much of our reality in ways that we don't even realize. One of the reasons people aren't getting married right now is they have too many options. That if you lived in a small town and there was one pretty girl that you thought you had a reasonable chance with, you were going to put everything you had into going after her. But if you've got an app on your phone where you're seeing girls who are way out of your league, and then you see that girl, maybe you're not going to give her the time of day because you just think, well, maybe I can find some girl who's even better than her. And you waste your life and you waste her life because you didn't just say, okay, this is good. I don't have to explore every possibility out there. So paradox of choice, closely related to that is this thing you're describing with the onslaught of information. It can create analysis paralysis. It can create a situation where there is so much information that you just say, well, I need more, I need more, I need more. And this is one of the classic failures in discernment, and this is one of the classic failures in decision making. Because you can always look for more information. And people, particularly who are more risk averse, can easily fall into this trap where it feels rash not to gather all the data, and they can never gather all the data. And so they just keep gathering more and more and more information. So you find these people who are drawn to the church, but there's so much more information to look for. And so even if they're doing it in good faith, they can sit on that fence for decades just gathering knowledge, just gathering information and saying, well, I started with these 20 objections. And along the way, 17 of them were answered, but I learned 10 new objections. And now I'm going to have to work through and that just can continue on ad infinitum. So I think there's a couple things. One, you have to have a reasonable threshold of action. When our Lord is teaching and preaching, he says a lot of things, and you're not going to know the answers to all of those things, and you're not going to maybe immediately agree with all of those things. That's okay. You don't wait till you see the wisdom of loving your enemies and turning the other cheek and all this before you decide to follow him. The threshold is much simpler. Is he who he says he is? And once you have enough information to say he is, now you can say yes to him, and there's an epistemological shift. Because once I can trust that he is a truth teller because he is who he says he is, I can trust him on the stuff that I don't even understand. I can give an assent.
Hallow is the #1 Catholic prayer and meditation app to deepen your spiritual life anytime, anywhere. Go to hallow.com/MattFrad to get the first 3 months for free.
Intellectually, that I don't get why that's true, but you tell me it's true and you know more than I do, and I trust you with the virtue of faith, for one, but also with a certain intellectual humility. Because we live in this world, like the idea of a Renaissance man doesn't exist anymore. Albert the Great was said to have known everything there was to know. You can't do that. I mean, Jimmy comes close, but you can't do that anymore where you just know everything about everything. And so I will hear these claims, light is somehow a particle and a wave and it behaves in these weird ways. And I think that's weird, that's fascinating, that makes zero sense to me. The more I try to understand it, the less I feel like I get it. And at a certain point, I just have to say, I trust the people who know this way more than I do. So that's another kind of element in this. There are times where you have to say, I'm just not going to know the answer to this question, but I have to trust that this person I believe is an authority is right. So that's true if we're talking about Jesus. It's true if we're talking about the church. It's true if we're talking about authorities in our own life, but it gets a lot trickier with those other authorities. And we can talk about that because sometimes those other authorities are wrong. And so then what do you do there? So you can have that kind of situation where there's just so much out there. So I would say this, anyone who finds themselves in that spot, number one, the question you should be asking is the Catholic Church who she says she is? If she is, you should be Catholic. If she's not, you shouldn't be. Second, you can find a potentially infinite number of objections to the Catholic claim from every possible direction. But lay out a simple positive case. Is Jesus who he says he is? Does he say he's going to establish a church? Is that church visible? And does that church have a Petrine or papal kind of structure? And I think we can see all four of those things very clearly. I mean, my book, Pope Peter, it's years old now, but that was the argument I make. Like, if the papacy is true, everyone should be Catholic. If it's not true, no one should be Catholic. If you approach it like that, you don't have to deal with the analysis paralysis. You don't have to deal with an infinite number of doctrines from an infinite number of perspectives. And I don't know another way of kind of going forward other than to say, okay, let's consider this. Last thing. St. Irenaeus in Against Heresies gives this image of, he uses the image of arranging tiles. And I want to say that properly arranged, he says the tiles would be like the image of a king, but he accuses the Gnostics of rearranging them in maybe like the image of a dog or something like this. You could imagine, if you prefer, like puzzle pieces. And you can find, whether we're talking about all the various forms of Protestantism or all the non-Christian expressions of what they think the truth is, people put the puzzle pieces of reality together in different ways. And you can do that. You can make an internally coherent model of the world. Like, just within Christianity, we'll take that for instance. I think the dispensationalist worldview is complicated, maybe a little convoluted.
Explain that to people.
Okay, dispensationalists say God deals differently with different people in different ages. That part's actually true. And when you're reading something like the New Testament, some of it is written for Israel and some of it's written for the church. These two things are these radically separate entities. And so you can't just take a New Testament passage and assume it's written to you. I'm even here oversimplifying, but this is a worldview that gives you things like the rapture and everything else. And it's pretty new, like 19th century. You've got Darby and then Schofield, who really kind of pioneered this way of viewing the Bible. It's wrong on a lot of things, but the thing that's fascinating about it is how complicated and sophisticated it is. That if you go read like the Schofield Reference Bible or any of these works, and they'll have maps, charts, and all this stuff, putting together all this information in these baffling kind of ways to an outsider, where you're just like, why in the world would you think this is what that passage means? And then you look through their chart and you're like, I guess I see it from your perspective. I'm completely unpersuaded by it, but it's internally coherent. It makes sense within that world.
That's right.
And often in ways that it's very hard to kind of break into because they've spent so much more time thinking about that internal model of the world than you have.
That's right.
Similarly, I would suggest like the tulip model of Calvinism internally makes sense. If you believe man is totally depraved in such a way that he'll never choose to do the good thing unless God forces him to do it, well, then you have to say grace is irresistible, because if we could resist it, we would. And therefore, anyone who goes to hell must have been because God didn't want them to go to heaven, because he could have just given this irresistible grace to them. Therefore, God didn't want them to be saved. So you got something like double predestination. It makes no sense to say Christ died for those people if he never wanted them to be saved. So now the atonement is limited, and there can't be anything good in them because that would be something on their part, and they're so wicked they would never choose to do anything good ever. So election to salvation must be unconditional, and they can't possibly fall away from salvation, or they would. So you have perseverance of the saints. That is all. I think it's wrong. I think it's internally coherent. And we could give many more examples of this where within the worldview, they've arranged the puzzle pieces in a way that makes sense, but it's still wrong. And so we have to recognize, like, you can make sense of reality in all these different ways. And so one of the challenges we have is if you've got the Bible alone, or if you've got no trust that the Holy Spirit guided the church to get the puzzle pieces in the right order, you've got an infinite number of arrangements that those puzzle pieces could go in. And it seems genuinely limitless.
Thank you very much for watching that Pints with Aquinas clip. If you like it, do me a favor, click like and subscribe, and please offer a Hail Mary for the work of Pints with Aquinas and all the people we're trying to reach. God bless you.